Um, this lecture on Ryder was started by 1987 and was finished in 1990 for the Ryder Show at the Smithsonian in Washington. And I was the guest lecturer for that Ryder Show when it traveled to Brooklyn Museum in New York. Everyone hear me? I'll try to speak louder. To the Brooklyn Museum in New York and to Whitechapel in London. I was the guest speaker. It was written over 12 years ago. And I just read a little something this summer that I thought I probably would have put in this piece because I think it ties in very nicely with Ryder. And it also sort of helped me understand my love of Chinese art, painting and poetry. And it's from this book of Chinese poetry by Wei Lim Yip, Anthology of Major Modes in Chinese Poetry. And he says that the uniqueness of Chinese art, can we have a slide on? Let's get a painting up there. Oh, let's get the lights down then. You really should look up there most of the time. Listen to me a little of the time. That the uniqueness of Chinese art came from a Taoist belief in the 3rd to 4th century. That the phenomenon, the forces around us, both human and natural, cannot be seen by people because of all the conscious efforts in ordering it will result in a superficial structuring opposed upon an indifferentiated existence and therefore distorting it. Humans, when they try to understand and see the forces in nature, will only mannerize it into which humans can understand. That the Chinese try to paint and write about the phenomenon as it is, not as it is thought to be. To let the phenomenon show itself without limits, to let the objects of the phenomenon show the phenomenon as they see it, to show the forces when people are not around, to lose ourselves into the phenomenon. What I will be saying about the paintings is not mystical, it may be a little spiritual, but is as objective as any subjective idea can be about art. I feel many things about art should not and cannot be talked about, but I accept this opportunity to speak about Albert Pinkham Ryder because I feel a great responsibility to say the right words about his work. It is my worry to sound too academic in trying to explain why Ryder is such a great painter, but not appreciated according to his genius. I want somehow to clearly communicate what it is about his work that only other artists seem to see. Morrison Hartley said that Ryder was the most favorite among professional artists. The artist Ronald Bladen told me when he was a student at the San Francisco Art Institute in 1940s, Ryder was the most talked about artist there. It remains curious that it's still difficult to find critical writings on him. Next slide, please. There is no other artist whose feelings and ideas come close to my own than Ryder's. Things I say about Ryder's work, I expect to have in my own. Seeing Ryder's work seemed to clarify my sense for things inside of myself. When I was in college in the Midwest, Ryder was never mentioned. Coming to New York, my introduction to Ryder still took some time. I was in East Hampton visiting the artist Herman Cherry. That night there was a full moon with clouds racing overhead, and Herman said, "Oh, it looks like a Ryder sky." And I thought, oh, it does look like a horse and rider by the moon. 1 month later, I started my teaching job at the Brooklyn Museum. And after teaching, I would wander through the galleries and soon rounded a corner and discovered 5 small paintings, salon hung. I felt as if I had been hit by lightning. I had never seen paintings that had such presence. I was struck by a light that seemed to burn from deep within them. I was struck by the painting's intense drama, their emotional and intellectual gesturing of every shape, every mark, and every color to every other shape, mark, and color. Their weightlessness, their weight of immense density, and in the next instance, their weightlessness. I had the feeling that time had been compressed. They had that slap in the face reality that reveals powerful, invisible forces in and around us. These paintings seem to be constructed of living tissue. I can't move back or I'll fall off. Ryder's light seems to come from deep within the paintings. In comparison to one of his contemporaries, Ralph Blakelock, who seems to put the light in his paintings, Ryder's light feels discovered and born within the paint itself. In comparison to Ryder, the paintings of some of his other contemporaries, Albert Bierstadt, Thomas Cole, Frederick Church, seem to be no more than theater sets in their accurate pictures of the surface world. I wait for something to happen, but nothing does. Even within their heroic panoramas, nothing happens. Just theater sets waiting for the drama. In contrast, Ryder's paintings are full of a powerful drama that goes way beyond their literary iconography. In Ryder's paintings, there seemed to be a weight, a density below the surface. He seems to have made that crucial passage, as the painter Guy Goodwin used the word, from something felt and experienced into something we can feel and experience in paint. It is this crucial passage that is important. Ryder is able to embed his vision in the paint without the cumbersomeness of the self. It is a pure vision of a thing experienced. By putting the experience in, we are still left with the self. The ego is still there. In Ryder's work, we purely see the thing experienced without the self. It is not self-expression, it is selfless expression. It is the thing itself, that experience, born into paint. To eliminate the self through the experience, to annihilate the self in the experience, and to become one with it. Chinese landscape painting on the right. The Chinese do not regard nature from the outside. Instead, the artist acts like a medium to let the spirit through and get beyond humanity and become one with it. This is the qi. It is the first canon of Chinese painting. The life breath, the spirit resounds in the work. It is not the spirit of the artist's own self or ego. If a Chinese artist would want to paint a mountain, they would first go up and live on it and then come down and paint it. When a young artist, Ryder tried to copy the colors of nature, but he could never do it. He could never get what was there. And then one day, wandering about the fields in Yarmouth, Massachusetts, where he was spending the summer with an aunt and an uncle, he came upon this scene with some trees framing the space just like a painting. the deep blue of the midday sky, a solitary tree, brilliant with the green of early summer, a foundation of brown earth and gnarled roots. There was no details to vex the eye. Ryder took his paints and palettes, threw away his brushes, and smeared on the paint with his palette knife. He painted all day, happy as a goat, jumping around, running through the fields. By just that activity, unbridled by details, he was able to express the forces he was seeing below the surface. Ryder does not anthropomorphize nature. He saw the forces below the surface. Right slide is Mars and Hartley's portrait of Albert Pinkham Ryder. In my thinking of the emotional or imagination versus the intellectual or aesthetic gesturing in Ryder's work, I struggle to understand each of their properties and their actualities in paint. Mars and Hartley also struggled with these ideas. In his essay, Art and the Personal Life, he said that he had to take off the old clothes for new ones. The old clothes represented the imagination and the emotional. They are linked directly to William Blake and indirectly to Ryder, while the new ones are aesthetic and intellectual ideas represented by Cézanne. In the following quote, Hartley says, "Yet I cannot but return to previous themes which represents my conversion from emotional to intellectual notions. And my feeling is, of what use is a painting which does not realize its aesthetic problem? Underlying all sensible works of art, there must be somewhere in evidence the particular problem understood. It was so with those artists of the great past, who had the intellectual knowledge of structure upon which to place their emotions. It is this structural beauty that makes an old painting valuable. I would rather be sure that I place two colors in true relationship to each other than to have exposed a wealth of emotionalism gone wrong in the name of the richness of personal expression. For this reason, I believe that it is more significant to keep one's painting in a condition of severe experimentalism than to become a quick success by means of cheap repetition." This is Hartley's Cemetery, New Mexico, on the right screen. Here I disagree with Hartley's opinion that Ryder is only the imagination or the emotional. In Ryder's work, there is an emotional and intellectual gesturing of every mark, every shape, every color to every other mark, shape, and color. It is not an overt emotional gesture, but a very subtle gesturing, just as glances between two people are more revealing than words. It is a way in which these abstract entities speak to one another in the painting. It is also not an arbitrary gesture, but a very specific one that builds throughout the painting like fireflies on a summer night or lightning in a storm. His work has been said to have great design. The word design may have been more important in art in the late 19th century than now. To me, design in art is something that is put in to seduce the eye. Ryder is not a seducer or designer because he had the ability to make that passage from a thing experienced into something born into the paint. It is his great design that is really his great structure, and this together with his great color and mark making add up to his powerful emotional and intellectual gesturing. Piero della Francesca's Flagellation on the right screen. Another example of intellectual and emotional gesturing is in Piero della Francesca's Flagellation. Even with Piero's smooth Florentine surface, we still find the same specific gesturing of every shape, every color, to every other shape and color. Piero uses geometry the same way Ryder uses rocks, trees, sea, and sky, not for their own sake, but for what they can do to intensify the concept of the whole. Piero's geometry is used to intensify the vision of the most barbaric act under the guise of a refined, civilized society. He uses geometry not as an exercise in perspective, but for its emotional and intellectual gesturing to everything else in the painting. Ryder's pastoral study on the left. In Ryder's pastoral study, I have the feeling of the movements of great bodies in space. In the life of Piero, there's another similarity to Ryder, in that Piero's work was uncelebrated for centuries after his death. Only in recent history has Piero's artistic merit been rediscovered, and once again he is celebrated as a great artist. It seems to me the reason for his rediscovery was one of fashionable appropriateness of geometry and art. To me, Piero is not only great because of his geometry, but because of the way he used his geometry towards his content. I suppose the world is still waiting for a fashionably appropriate time to recognize Ryder as a great painting. If to be fashionably appropriate is what it takes to be appreciated, then art is like fashion. And this proves the condition for Darwin's theory of natural selection, that the survival of the fittest does not operate in an artificial environment. The art world, with its fashionable appropriateness, seems to be the most artificial environment ever created. Giorgione's The Tempest on the right slide, on the right screen. Ryder is also similar to another great artist, Giorgione, whose paintings with their new poetic pictorial space were a great influence on artists of his time and after. In the same way, Ryder's new poetic concreteness of space has been a great influence both directly and indirectly on artists that followed. Another thing that might be involved with an art experience is the presence of time in a work of art. It would be the impact of a present time revealed. Not past time, not future time, but the exact moment, the awesome present. Ryder could compress this time just like about no one else. To compress this present time is to split it like an atom and intensify the experience of that time. In this compression, there is revealed powerful forces only glimpsed at. Ryder makes the invisible visible. These are the same forces that Achille Gorky tried to see in paint when he said he would just keep staring, trying to see below the surface of things. Right slide is Jackson Pollock's Seascape. In World War II, Gorky wanted to form a camouflage unit with artists in the Army. He said that because an artist's job was to make the invisible visible, they would be the best at making the visible invisible. If Ryder were still around, all of them, Gorky, de Kooning, Pollock, etc., enlisted and formed this unit. Ryder would be elected commander because he would be the oldest and would have experimented the most with paint. Ryder wanted to expand the possibilities of paint in ways that it had never been done in the past. Marsden Hartley called Ryder the painter-poet of the inanimate in things. Jackson Pollock's Fazafe. While teaching at Skowhegan Summer School in Maine, I told the landscape painters that every time their paintings looked like art in books, no forces were revealed. Only when something else came into the paintings could some of the forces be revealed. These forces are of a greater intelligence and realm of emotion than those of human experience. These forces are of the microcosm and macrocosm in nature, and this nature is human energy and natural energy combined. There is no separation. We as human beings with less intelligence and a smaller realm of emotional mannerize these things when we start to see them. We only allow ourselves to see what we can comprehend. A great artist may be one who not only has glimpsed of this other world, but is able to embed the paint with its vision. Ryder was one who could. Sir Lawrence Gowing, a visiting lecturer at Skowhegan that summer, gave brilliant lectures, one on William Turner. He spoke of a 2-year period in Turner's life which changed him from an English mannerist into a painter of great depth and scope. Turner traveled to the continent, to the Louvre and other museums in Europe. He then painted in the mountains of Switzerland. These forces converted him into the Turner we love today. This was best described in Ryder's work by Marsden Hartley. At all times in his work, one has the feeling of their having lately passed, if ever so fleetingly, some bodily shape seeking a solitude of its own. For me, that bodily shape would be the container for the forces I'm trying to discuss. Ryder has been called a painter of dreams. This can be misleading unless one understands that dreams are reality condensed. Ryder may use biblical or literary storylines only as a mere starting point to reveal his vision of reality. After the turn of the 20th century, ideas regarding dreams and the unconscious had a special impact on modern art. Abstractionists struggled to express the unconscious in the modern world. They are as much painters of dreams as Ryder is a painter of dreams. They are painters of reality as Ryder is a painter of reality. It is the reality of the forces below the surface. It is the thing experienced directly. Their paintings have that slap in the face of reality as Ryder's have. Jackson Pollock said that the only American master who interests me is Ryder. I'm against any kind of flag waving or any kind of chauvinism at all. In the 1920s, artists used Ryder as a flag to be waved against modern influences in art coming from Europe, a reactionary and misleading notion. For as the artist Maurice Vlaminck said, intelligence is international, stupidity is national, and art is local. Art might be about a very specific place, a time, a person. In its best sense, it embraces the subtle aspects of a very specific time. Mars and Hartley tried to answer the question, what is American art? In his essay, he said, the creative spirit is at home wherever that spirit finds breath to draw. It is neither national or international. He also said that if America is to have a great tradition, it will begin with the great and lasting name of Albert Pinkham Ryder. It is not the size of a painting that makes it any more American or anything else. Neither small paintings nor large paintings. Europe, with its great frescoes and murals, has a much more indigenous tradition for the grand size. America has no tradition for large church murals or art used for political purposes. Iconography, whether literal or biblical, and concepts are international, not national. Stories travel around the world. It is not the light that distinguishes an American painting, though a darker light seems to be natural to America, East Coast painting. Europe also has its dark light in Rembrandt, the Venetian School, Velázquez, etc. The difference, say, between American art and European art could be as subtle as the difference between eating with your fork facing up or eating with your fork facing down. Europe, with its long history of art based on narrative scenes painted for religious or political reasons, seemed to be more indigenous, and the necessity of a story or concept seems to be more apparent. American art seems to have less need for a narrative or conceptual base. Its tradition seems to be a more flat-footed, groping way of letting the content be born into the paint. This is not a criticism of European art, only a subtle difference between them. The first American artists were probably shipbuilders, then portrait painters. Ryder was our first and one of ours or anyone's greatest gropers. Mars and Hartley called him among the first citizens of the moon. Ryder used literary or biblical scenes only as a starting point, and then the long, endless path, sometimes many years, would begin. Ryder was seen working on a painting in a craft shop where he was also working on leather screens. At the end of each day of painting, he would scrape down his work and then apply a quick-drying light wash of color. The next day, he would sit and stare at the ghosts of marks and forms from the day before. And then, responding to these ghosts, he would begin to paint, only to continue the same method day after day. Through the process, a kind of seepage would take place. The experience would begin to slowly work its way out of the depths of Ryder's subconscious, and in this way every mark would become at some time electrified. Or as the artist Myron Stout called it, atomic painting. Every bloody atom has to be painted individually. This groping would let the painting have a life of its own. And during the building of this process of pulling these experiences from the corners of his subconscious, Ryder must have felt he was being pulled by a team of wild dogs, or like a miner deep in the earth with only a little light on his head and a little chirp from a canary to keep him going. By repeating this process over and over again, he would let the light and content be born into the paint. He was not just putting the light or content into the painting, but by letting it arrive, by letting it emerge from the paint, the paint transcended its material realm into living tissue. Ryder's groping for meaning is our need and our love for the mysterious. It is the spirit of adventure and terror of the unknown. It is the search for meaning that have led artists like Gorky, Pollock, de Kooning, Rothko, etc., to express the murkiness of the modern world in the abstractions. And theirs was not the action of an artist in front of a painting, but the flat-footed groping for content. This subtlety may typify our tradition. A few years ago, I wrote a poem on Ryder. I'm a painter and not a poet, so poets, please forgive me. Oil paint for Albert Ryder. Submerged in the murk of the modern life, submerged in the murk of oil, the great mark maker breathes forth clarity, a clarity of images and emotions born into paint, a clarity of light and human compassion, a clarity of poignant concentration and compression. A murky clarity transcended into living tissue. The first father, the sea, the rock, the seed, the witch doctor to cure the ills of us all. There's also another strange coincidence that in Henry Melville's Moby Dick, there is a paragraph, page 17, where Ishmael enters the Sprouter Inn. But what most puzzled and confounded you was a long, pretentious black mass of something hovering in the center of the picture over there. Blue, dim, perpendicular lines floating in a nameless yeast. A boggy, soggy, squishy picture truly enough to drive a nervous man distracted. Yet there was some sort of indefinite, half-attained, unimaginable sublimity about it that fairly froze you to it, till you involuntarily took an oath with yourself to find out what that marvelous painting meant. Ever and on, a bright but alas deceptive idea would dart through you. It's the Black Sea in a midnight gale. It's the unnatural combat of four primal elements. It's the blasted heath. It's the hyboreal winter scene. It's the breaking up of the icebound stream of time. But at last, all these fancies yield to the one portentous something in the picture's midst, which, with that once found out, all the rest were plain. But stop, does it not bear a faint resemblance to the gigantic fish, or even the great Leviathan himself? This was written some 30 years before Ryder. And I think Melville and Poe sort of are the originators of the stream of consciousness and free verse in American literature, just like Ryder had an influence on American painting. But Ryder, who lived up in that area, and if the Sprouter Inn existed, could have seen that painting in the Sprouter Inn. I have one more thing I'd like to say, and it's about the school. Margaret and I have been teaching here for about a month. And I also judged and installed the alumni show last year. So we've only had a little introduction to the workings of the school. But one thing does seem glaringly obvious: the physical condition and organization of the buildings that comprise this complex. The 4 buildings in the lot were bought one at a time and never really thought of as one organism that it actually is. We were very happy to learn of your choice as Diane Lewis as your architect. We asked Diane to show us the proposals for the reorganization. It is an extremely difficult job for an architect working with the buildings of such historic significance. I feel Diane has done a fantastic job in preserving the important elements of the buildings that are of personal meaning to the community of the history of the buildings, and also which would be demanded by the Landmarks Commission and the city to be preserved. She has integrated these elements of such uniqueness into a fully functioning art school of the 21st century. Her proposal is also a beautiful and powerful architectural statement in New York City that'll declare that the studio school is here to stay, and we will have a vital part in the culture of the world. I highly recommend this building program continue. Anyone have a question I can answer? Maybe.